may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, so there has been some horrendous analysis of Jonathan Taylor as of late. So I really want to dive into Taylor, not necessarily for Dynasty. We can definitely talk about that over on our Dynasty channel. But I want to talk about Jonathan Taylor for those redraft leagues, those leagues that you're going to be playing just for 2021 production. Try to talk about what the actual projections are from a range of outcomes standpoint, not just his median projection, just not what you would be expecting if all things stay neutral, because we know there are so many moving variables here. We know projecting a player from his rookie season to his sophomore year, you would expect a natural jump, especially with the player that was an elite prospect at the running back position. Now, we are going to get into everything there is with this Indianapolis Colts situation for Jonathan Taylor, including at the end of the video, my opinion on what you're going to find from Carson Wentz with him reuniting with his former head coach. But of course, I have to give the announcement this Saturday. We have that flock meetup. Please, if you are in Austin, Texas, try to make it out June 19th, 6 p.m., Zilker Park. It should be a lot of fun. This is going to be the only Texas flock meetup we ever have. So please come out if you can. And also go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. Literally every single video that we've been uploading as of late crushes 200 likes the first day it's uploaded. So thank you so much for that, guys. You're making this channel grow at an exponential rate. And obviously that is going to make me even more motivated to keep on pumping out this content. But yeah, let's dive into Jonathan Taylor, who right now is going as the 5th player overall in these redraft leagues. Now, if you go through and looked at drafts at the beginning of the offseason, I mean, way too early best ball drafts, way too early, just regular high stakes redraft leagues. I mean, Jonathan Taylor was actually being drafted ahead of Derrick Henry. So here you see a small fall for Jonathan Taylor moving back to the 105. He is still going ahead of some other running backs in Ezekiel Elliott, Saquon Barkley, and Austin Eckler, all going directly behind him. Now, before we dive into what Jonathan Taylor did in 2020, of course, that's going to be very useful. But what we really need to do is we need to remember the type of prospect Jonathan Taylor was coming into that 2020 NFL draft class. Because you really can't judge an entire player based off of 1 year of data. No, you really have to have that overall picture on what you're going to be expecting for a player like this. And if we go through and look at Jonathan Taylor, I will be the first person to say, I mean, he was the best running back prospect coming out of college since Saquon Barkley. I mean, this was someone that not only checked every single box that you look for, but he cleared the minimum thresholds by a ridiculous amount. I mean, it was absurd what you found with Jonathan Taylor. I mean, the size, obviously elite. This is someone that's only 5'10", 226 pounds. So literally, that's the exact thing you look for at the running back position. I mean, if I asked you, hey, Mason, you're creating someone on Madden, you want him to be one of the best running backs of all time, what size are you going to give him? You're going to make that man 5'10", 226 pounds. And now I know that a lot of people had questions about his receiving usage coming out of Wisconsin, but he actually had a 10.3% college target share, which is significantly higher than the threshold that we have set based on our historical research at 8.5% for those college prospects. So he clearly shows that he does have the receiving capability. He was only 21 years old, and he was drafted at the top of the 2nd round with a trade up from the Indianapolis Colts, which we always like to see. Now, what's even more so impressive about Jonathan Taylor, and what's something we don't focus in too much on the running back position because there are so many variables that go into this, but was his collegiate production. Now, if you go through and you look at the 3 seasons that he was there at Wisconsin, keep in mind, starting at 18 years old. So 18, 19, and 20 years old were the time period that he accumulated these stats. Over that time period, he started nearly every single game for this team. Every single game, Jonathan Taylor was the starting running back, missing no time at all. And during that stretch, he averaged over 22 carries a game. He averaged over 150 rushing yards. He averaged over 150 rushing yards in a major conference at a major program in college within his ages of 18, 19, and 20. Now that is absolutely absurd. Averaged about 1.23 rushing touchdowns per game. And you go through and you really don't see the receiving production until his true junior season, which is completely fine, understanding the scheme in college, as well as understanding that, hey, you're not necessarily going to be expecting someone to break out as a receiver at 18, 19 years old. Give this player a little bit of time to develop, make sure that he is going to be comfortable on passing down situations. And here, that's exactly what you had in 2020. So his final year at Wisconsin, he came through and he averaged 1.86 receptions per game, 18 receiving yards. So I really just want to lay that groundwork out here to remind everybody how great Jonathan Taylor was coming out of college, why he was the majority of the dynasty communities. I know this is a redraft video, but if we have to remember what a prospect was like, I mean, everybody had him as their running back one before the draft. I will say we had DeAndre Swift, but let's not focus too much in on that. This is a player that was the best running back prospect since Saquon Barkley, all things considered. And he goes into 2020, and he's getting drafted in about the 4th or 5th round, depending on the experience of the people you're playing with in those redraft leagues. And as soon as Marlon Mack goes down with the torn Achilles in week 1, I came out here and I said, hey, Jonathan Taylor, 100% going to be a league-winning running back this year. I mean, if you drafted him in the 4th or 5th round of a high-stakes redraft league, or you drafted him just say in the 7th or 8th, because that's where he was going in casual formats, you drafted a league winner. You now have a top 10 running back going forward. You have someone that's almost going to guarantee you that you are going to come away with your fantasy championship. Well, that didn't exactly happen. Now, Jonathan Taylor did finish as the running back 14 in points per game. And he did this with 15.5 carries a game, 2.4 receptions a game, 98 total yards. And he had a decent touchdown mark, but that's what you're going to expect with the running back with this size, because clearly he's going to be getting every single touch at the goal line. He had 12 touchdowns in 15 games. But what you really like to see for Jonathan Taylor is something that we always talk about with these players that are going into year 2. You want to try to break up their rookie season and see if they finish stronger than what they started with. You want to see them trending in the right direction now that they finally are accustomed to playing in the pros, now that they have their rhythm down. And that's what you had with Jonathan Taylor. I mean, in weeks 1 through 9, Jonathan Taylor was actually the running back 23 in points per game. But starting in week 10, you saw a massive switch here. Starting in week 10, weeks 10 through 17, Jonathan Taylor was actually the running back 5 in fantasy. Now, obviously, that is a massive jump. That's not something that you can overlook. And here, that's where he's being drafted this season at that running back 5 mark. And I know a lot of people are focusing in on the wrong details here with Jonathan Taylor. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, but Marlon Mack's coming back. Marlon Mack gets re-signed, yada, yada, yada. Well, that doesn't matter at all for me. I mean, you're looking at Marlon Mack as a player that, in my opinion, has a very low probability of actually making a difference for Indianapolis or actually seeing much usage at all, given the fact that we have such a long history in the NFL of players across all positions, really, not being able to come back from torn Achilles. I mean, you go through and the number that you see across anything that you look up online is the fact that about 75% of players are able to eventually come back from the injury and actually play on the NFL field, but they're never the same guy. They're never having that same level of explosion. And I guess if you saw that with like a Nick Chubb or you saw that with the Derrick Henry, then sure, you would expect that player, once they come back 18 months from their injury, to all of a sudden be someone, may not necessarily be what they were before, but still having a role on their NFL offense. Now, in the case of Marlon Mack, I think that you can safely say that this is a player that didn't necessarily have that top tier talent to begin with. So once you see that juice gone from him, I would be very hard pressed to think that he is going to have a significant role on this team. I mean, the most recent example of this is my Texas Longhorn, Donta Foreman, tearing his ACL in his rookie season for the Houston Texans after having 2 massive breakout weeks. I mean, I was so excited. A player that was fantastic in college, someone that got 3rd round NFL draft capital going into the league. He tears his Achilles, and yes, he finally makes it back to the NFL field. He finally makes it back where he is getting touches in a game. And it's 2 to 3 years later on the Tennessee Titans, a completely different team, years down the line. Now, if you look up reports on Marlon Mack, every sign points to him having a great rehab. Every sign points to him being on track for the initial timetable set. But I will say, I am always extremely hesitant when you see that significant injury. I mean, this isn't a torn ACL. This is a torn Achilles. This is about the worst injury that you can suffer in any sport. But anyway, even if Marlon Mack does come back, even if Marlon Mack can come and see 3 carries a game, 4 or 5 carries a game, I'm not going to be too worried, because you look at the combination of Jordan Wilkins and Nyheim Hines from last year and you go, okay, Jonathan Taylor was already missing out on 11.5 carries a game, 44 rushing yards a game, close to 5 receptions, and close to 37 receiving yards a game. And on top of that, you had the combination of Jordan Wilkins and Nyheim Hines averaging 81 total yards a game and finishing with 8 total touchdowns. So even if Marlon Mack does indeed come back, I would be really surprised if Marlon Mack has a larger role than what you had with Jordan Wilkins last year. I think that Jordan Wilkins is pretty much just going to get phased out of this offense. Marlon Mack can take those snaps. And I think what you're going to find is, based on the success that you had with Jonathan Taylor during his rookie season, based on the fact that he looked decent in pass protection, and he also averaged 2.5 receptions in his rookie year, I think that you see the snaps slightly go down for Nyheim Hines, which should open up even more of this offense for Jonathan Taylor, someone that has been a workhorse running back throughout his entire NFL career. So we're looking at it as, hey, Jonathan Taylor is an elite prospect, someone going to be getting nearly every single touch in his backfield. He's going to be losing some of the receiving usage to Nyheim Hines, because we know Nyheim Hines has that skill set. Now, what is the situation going to be like in Indianapolis? What is the overall production going to be here? And I will say that you're looking at the Indianapolis Colts, led off with Quentin Nelson, as having one of the best offensive lines in football. I mean, this isn't even debatable. Now, of course, I am not some offensive line guru. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like we can go through and grade these offensive lines ourselves. But what we can do is we can outsource this information. Now, I know a lot of people have problems with PFF, but I think at the very minimum, we can all agree that they're at least in the ballpark. They're at least in the ballpark of what you're going to be expecting this upcoming season. And here they have the Indianapolis Colts ranked as the second best offensive line in football for 2021. So even if you don't necessarily agree with that exact assessment, I think you are looking at it as saying that, hey, the Colts are going to have a damn good offensive line. So the real question mark here, the real thing that, in my opinion, has all of Jonathan Taylor's future eggs in this basket is going to be the Carson Wentz situation. So obviously this team goes out there, trades for Carson Wentz after Phillip Rivers announces his retirement in 2021. And they're moving on from a decent quarterback in Phillip Rivers this past year. I mean, I am kind of embarrassed to say this because I was all out on Phillip Rivers. One of the reasons that we were avoiding a player like T.Y. Hilton at all costs last year was the fact that I thought Phillip Rivers was going to be one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the NFL. And I was wrong. That simply wasn't the case. Old man Phillip Rivers was very good in Indianapolis, given the fact that his expectations were so low, at least for myself. Here he averaged 34 pass attempts a game, 260 passing yards a game. He had 24 total touchdowns of the season, only 11 total interceptions. But the number I really want to focus in on is adjusted yards per pass attempt. And here he hit 7.7. Now, comparing this to Carson Wentz this past year, Carson Wentz was arguably the worst quarterback in the NFL. I mean, Wentz had a similar amount of pass attempts per game. He only averaged 218 passing yards. And yes, I will acknowledge the fact that Carson Wentz was placed into a very bad situation. The Eagles' offensive line was decimated. You had the Zach Ertz injury. You had the Dallas Goedert injury at some point in the season. And you had Travis Fulgham as his wide receiver 1. So obviously, that's a situation you can't get excited about. I will say that you see Jalen Hurts later on that year come in and ball, and you really have to go, okay, well, we can't just throw everything in on the situation. But the number that is so bad for Carson Wentz is not 15 interceptions to only 16 touchdowns. I mean, yeah, that's horrendous. But what I'm more so focused in on is the fact that you had a 5.2 yards per adjusted pass attempt. Now, that is ridiculously bad. That is close to the league bottom, if not the actual league bottom, for all those starting quarterbacks that played enough games. But the thesis here with a lot of people is saying, hey, the reason they traded for Carson Wentz, the reason that they went and gave up those assets was because Frank Reich believes he can go through and fix Carson Wentz this upcoming season. So I understand that thesis, and I understand a lot of people want to believe that, especially Indianapolis Colts fans, especially Carson Wentz fans. So what I want to do is I want to go through and look at Carson Wentz's career with and without Frank Reich. So obviously, Reich was the head coach for the Indianapolis Colts from 2018 to now. He was the offensive coordinator for the Eagles for 2016 and 2017. So what we need to do is we need to look at Carson Wentz in 2016, 2017, preferably a few years after that, and see if you have the drop in production and the drop in the play of Carson Wentz aligning with when Frank Reich decided to go to Indianapolis. So here, with Carson Wentz, let's not focus too much in on 2016 because Carson Wentz was a rookie. Carson Wentz, obviously, you can't have him held up to very high expectations as a rookie quarterback. But in 2017, this is when you have the magical year. This is when you have a lot of people saying Carson Wentz is the MVP of the league. Obviously, this is when you had the Philadelphia Eagles winning that Super Bowl. But here, you have 33.8 pass attempts a game for Carson Wentz, 253 passing yards. The number that stands out is that he actually was the leader in the NFL for his touchdown percentage per pass attempt this league. We know this is something that definitely regresses when you're near that realm. We saw this with Lamar Jackson from 2019 to 2020. We saw this with Patrick Mahomes from 2018 to 2019. I mean, you regress there. We understand that that's how simple math works. But regardless, he averaged 2.5 touchdowns a game with only half an interception. Now, what I'm impressed with is 8.3 adjusted yards per pass attempt. So I really want to check in and see if the thesis that Frank Reich is going to be able to fix Carson Wentz and that you're having the two as a pair that leads to success. Would that line up if you have Reich leaving in 2018 and you have the actual downplay of Carson Wentz that same season? Well, simply, that did not happen. In 2018, with a new offensive coordinator coming in, Carson Wentz still had that fantastic quarterback play. Carson Wentz still had a 7.9 adjusted yards per pass attempt mark, and I really don't want to be too worried about that. I mean, if you have that this upcoming season, I think everybody that's a fan of Carson Wentz is going to be jumping up and down with excitement. Now, the fall off came multiple years after Frank Reich left Philadelphia. The fall off came in 2019, where then you had the yards per adjusted pass attempt falling down to 7.0, which is a mark that you really cannot get away with in today's NFL. Now, obviously, this fall continues in 2020, and I don't have the exact explanation of this. Obviously, I'm not a quarterback scout. I am not a quarterback guru, but what I can say is I think everybody just assuming that you're going to have Carson Wentz resume to that 2017 level of play, I think you're wrong here. I think it's a lot more complicated than just getting that new coach reunited with Carson Wentz. I think there are so many moving variables that it's hard to say exactly what's going to happen with Wentz. So instead of saying that you're going to have his play return to what it was, I'd rather look at it through the range of outcomes. I'd rather go, okay, on this side of the spectrum, there's a chance that Carson Wentz is broken. There's a chance that those injuries that have stacked up through his entire NFL career, there's a long list of them, has made it where he is limited physically now, or he is shaken mentally, where he is no longer the same quarterback, and the Indianapolis Colts are going to realize this, and they are not going to be able to win a Super Bowl with him. There's that side of the spectrum. Also, there's the side of the spectrum where Carson Wentz comes in and he goes back to that 2017 or 2018 play. I think anybody that's a fan of the Colts, anybody that's a fan of Carson Wentz would be very happy if he just had that 2018 play. So we have to ask ourselves, what happens with both ends of the spectrum? So if you have Carson Wentz going back and having that elite play once again, I think you actually have this offense as one of the better offenses in the NFL. I mean, you have the elite offensive line. You have the running back in Jonathan Taylor that's going to be extremely exciting. And if those two things come together, I think you can safely say that Jonathan Taylor has the upside to be a top 3 running back in fantasy. Now, I'm a little bit hesitant to say that Jonathan Taylor has the upside to be the overall running back 1 in fantasy, given the fact that he would really have to be a Derrick Henry type player, or he would just have to be taking more snaps away from a player like Nyheim Hines. So maybe you believe that. Maybe you believe that Nyheim Hines is going to be phased out of this offense even more, and Jonathan Taylor is going to take that usage on receiving downs. And in that case, sure, you can say that he has top 1 overall upside. But I think you really cannot overlook what happens on this end of the spectrum where Carson Wentz is just assumed to be broken, where Carson Wentz is going to come in. He's not going to be able to elevate the overall play of the offense. You're going to have the Indianapolis Colts as a team that projects to be in the bottom 10 of the NFL halfway through the season. And I really want to focus in on the Carson Wentz trade because this is so important. So the Philadelphia Eagles traded away Carson Wentz for the 85th overall pick in 2021, and they also traded him away for a future second-round pick, but there's a big asterisk on that pick. If Carson Wentz plays 75% of the snaps for the Indianapolis Colts this upcoming season, then all of a sudden that turns into a first-round pick. So I'm sitting here, and I really want everybody to know, and I'm not saying this is 100% going to happen, but it's in the range of outcomes. What happens if we get to week 12? What happens if we get to week 13? So we're coming up on the fantasy playoffs, and you have, just say in week 12, the Colts are sitting in a spot where instead of being 5-6, they're much worse than that. Say that they are actually 2-9, say that they are 3-8, but either way, they have no shot at making it to the playoffs at that point. And they're going, you know what? It's in the range of outcomes for us to end up with a top 5 overall pick in this upcoming draft. At that case, I can guarantee you what's going to happen is Carson Wentz is going to the bench, because there is no way that if Carson Wentz leads this team to a start where they are not having a shot to play for a playoff spot, they're going to continue to start him, because with the offensive line, he will have no excuse for that poor play. So if you do not have him winning games, this team is going to be incentivized to go through and bench him, because the last thing they're going to want to do is give away a top 5 draft pick over to Philadelphia if they can help it. So knowing it's in the range of outcomes for Carson Wentz to be broken, knowing that it is in the range of outcomes for the worst quarterback in the NFL last year to still be bad this upcoming season, to not be able to lead his team to get anywhere close to the playoffs, we have to look at the other quarterback options on this team. So there are 2 guys. There's Sam Ellinger and Jacob Eason. Now, y'all know that I just graduated from the University of Texas. I was actually here all 4 years that Sam Ellinger was our starting quarterback. And I can tell you with confidence, after going with a comp pick in the 6th round of this year's NFL draft, Sam Ellinger is not going to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. It will never happen. He was a great quarterback. I am happy with everything that he did for UT, but he simply does not have the arm strength to be a successful NFL quarterback. I mean, I would imagine that if Sam Ellinger gets thrust into the starting role in Indianapolis, I mean, he is going to be by far and away one of the worst quarterbacks to ever take a snap this upcoming season. Now, Jacob Eason, I think he's actually the guy that's second in line for that starting job. And he was a 4th round draft pick last year. And if you look at historically what happens with quarterbacks that were drafted in the 4th round, I mean, my God, it's going to be a Mason Rudolph type situation. It's going to be a very, very ugly situation. So we can say, despite them having an elite offensive line, that it's in the range of outcomes for this team to be a bottom 5 offense this upcoming year. And if we look at the bottom 5 offenses last year to go, hey, what kind of running back production did we find here? You had the Jets, the Giants, the Jags, the Bengals, and the Broncos. So I'm pretty much bringing this up, obviously not trying to say that any of these running backs starting for these teams are anywhere close to the talent level of a Jonathan Taylor. But I want to make sure everybody understands that when you have that bottom 5 offense in the NFL, it is going to be nearly impossible, unless the running back is literally getting every single touch out of the backfield like a James Robinson, for that running back to be a top 5 guy in fantasy. So I think if you are going to be drafting Jonathan Taylor, you do not need to be worried about Marlon Mack with the history that we have of running back with torn Achilles. What you have to be worried about is you have to be worried about Carson Wentz. So if you're all in on Carson Wentz returning to form that he was in 2017, 2018, at that point, I think, yeah, Jonathan Taylor, a great pick in the middle of the 1st round of this year's draft. But if you are hesitant, if you think Carson Wentz is closer to what we saw in 2019 or 2020, at that point, I don't think you draft Jonathan Taylor in a redraft league. I think at that point, maybe you go with someone that you feel a little bit more confident about in either an Ezekiel Elliott or a Saquon Barkley. But yeah, I think it's very simple here. You essentially are making a bet with Carson Wentz for Jonathan Taylor's upcoming season production and what it means for his overall ceiling. But thank you, my dudes. Of course, drop a like, go down to the comment section. Let me know what you think about Carson Wentz. Let me know if you think he's going to allow Jonathan Taylor to be a top overall running back for fantasy purposes. And yeah, subscribe to the channel. I will see y'all with the video tomorrow.